You can use your faith to overcome fear. You can choose faith over fear. You can choose to be courageous even in the midst of whatever you may be facing or going through. You can choose courage instead of fear. And I want to just give you one point on tonight from the book of Esther. Esther was an orphan girl. She came from nothing. She may felt like she was a nobody, insignificant, didn't have any influence. But God has a way of taking the least of those, raising them up to be great. Even in your life, He can take the least person. You may feel like you're a nobody. You may feel overlooked. You may feel forgotten. You may feel like you came from nothing. You may feel like, that that your life doesn't matter. But in the eyes of God, every life matters. So let's talk about Esther. Esther was a young, beautiful woman, and she was an orphan. She came from, a situation where she was being raised by a relative, but God used that situation to elevate her. And He can use your situation to elevate you. So, in the book of Esther, the whole book of Esther is a great book to read. If you ever want to dive into characters in the Bible and characters that God used in the Bible, Esther is a great, great book to read. You will be encouraged after reading the book of Esther. You will be encouraged by her faith. You will be encouraged by the wisdom that God gave her. You will be encouraged by knowing that God always comes through for His people. And no matter what evil may be trying to hinder you, destroy your life, whatever some enemy may be trying to do in your life, if you trust God, He will come through for you. If you put that situation in God's hands, you watch how He will come through for you. But the book of Esther is such an interesting book. And that book lets us know, Esther's life lets us know that it doesn't matter how insignificant you may feel. It doesn't matter what background you came from. It doesn't matter if you feel like you have no influence. God is able to use a life or person that is willing to allow Him to use them. He will take a willing vessel and He will raise you up to be a deliverer for your people. That's what He did for Esther. He raised her up, and she was willing to take a risk. She was willing to not be not to decide that I'm going to go before the king. If I perish, I perish. But she put her people before her own life. She put her people, she put her trust in God, and He came through. So how the story goes, of course, Esther was right. She was able to be elevated to be queen. The queen before her, she got dethroned because she didn't want to be paraded before drunken men. She chose not to be paraded before drunken men, because in those days, if the king summons you, you didn't have a choice whether to come or whether not to come. If he summons you, you came. Or it was like breaking the law. If you didn't come before the king when he summons you, whether you're male or female, it was like breaking the law. And so she lost her position because she chose that I'm not going to be paraded before a bunch of drunken men. So that left way for a new queen. And long story short, Esther became that queen. But there was an evil person that was in rulership in the land of Persia. His name was Haman. Haman didn't like the Jewish people. He didn't like Mordecai, because Mordecai chose not to bow before Haman whenever he walked through, because he felt like, oh, I'm in this high position. When I come through, you need to bow. But Haman was one that, nah, your high position and the pride and the ego that Haman had, it didn't impress Mordecai. So Mordecai chose not to bow before him. So of course that hurt Haman's ego. So he decided, okay, you're not gonna bow before me. How about I just get rid of all your people? So he devised some evil plan, and he convinced, or he got the king to agree to his plan to eradicate all the Jewish people in the land. So that's when there was a decree made that on a certain day, all Jews were going to be killed. Not only were they going to be killed, you were able to take their possessions as well. So Mordecai went to Esther and he told Esther about the evil plot to eradicate an entire Jewish population. Like he wanted to get rid of all the Jews. So he wanted to annihilate them. So Mordecai went to Esther. He said, listen, you need to go before the king and you need to ask for mercy for your people. But she was like, I can't do that. You can't go before the king unless he summons you. If you go before the king and he didn't summons you, you could be killed. So she's like, I could lose my life going before the king. But Mordecai reminded her, he said, listen, don't think that you're going to be safe in the palace because you're a Jewish queen, even though he told her to not let her Jewish heritage be known. But he let her know, don't think that you're going to be safe because this is a decree to get rid of all the Jewish people. So he let her know that you will not be safe in your palace, Esther. So she decided, okay, let's go on a fast. She said, I need you to fast for me. So she fasted for she told all the Jewish people, she told Mordecai, let them all fast. Let the whole entire Jewish nation fast for me. And I and my maids are going to do the same. So they fasted 3 days, no food, no drink. And she decided that after my fast, I'm going to go before the king. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about how God can use you if you're a willing vessel, no matter where you came from, no matter what background you may have had, no matter how insignificant you may feel your life is. If you are a willing vessel, God can use you to make a difference in your community, in your family, on your job, whatever area of influence you may have. If you're a willing vessel, God is able to use you to make a difference. So we're talking about how you can overcome your fear by using your faith. So Esther decided, hey, I could say, no, I don't want to take on this risk. I don't want to be the person to go before the king. Like I could die. But she chose instead to say, I'm going to take this risk. Because Mordecai reminded her, he said, who's to know that you have been elevated to queen for such a time as this? So who's to say that you have been put on that job? You have been put in that position. You might have been put in that specific area of influence for such a time as this. So you may be afraid to stand up and be that voice for the voiceless. You may feel like you're not adequate enough to be that influencer. You may feel like you're not adequate enough. You may feel like, well, I'm nobody. I come from nothing. Or, you don't know what kind of life I've had. Or you don't know, I'm not educated. Or maybe you may feel like, well, I didn't graduate from this college, or I didn't graduate from high school. Or you may feel like your position on your job may be the most insignificant position. But do not be mistaken that if you are a willing vessel, God can use you to make a difference in your area of influence. And I want you to choose to be courageous. Choose your faith over your fear. Choose to have courage and be a willing vessel. If you have to go on a fast, go on a fast. What happened when Esther went on a fast? I believe God gave her wisdom on how to go before Haman, on what to do when she did go before Haman. When she fasted and she prayed And she went before, went before the king, not Haman, the king. When she went before the king, immediately when he came in her presence, he extended his golden scepter, meaning he gave her favor. That favor came from God. That favor came because God was with her. And even in your life and my life, when we are willing vessels, he extends favor to us. So don't be afraid of standing up for what you believe in. Don't be afraid for standing up for being a voice for the voiceless. Don't feel like that your life is so insignificant that you can't be used by God. He can use anyone who gives him a willing heart and a willing vessel. So long story short, Esther went before the king. He extended his golden scepter. She received favor. She invited the king to come to a banquet. And long story short, she explained what was going to happen to her people. And when he found out what was going to happen to her people, the person that was behind that evil plot, which was Haman, he ended up, the hole that he wanted to dig for the Jewish people ended up being his own hole. Like the way he wanted them to be killed, he ended up being killed. So this lets us know that God can use the most unlikely person to accomplish his purpose and his will. I want to leave you a point or two. Know that Esther was an orphan in a foreign land, but she displayed great courage in the middle of crisis. We can display great courage in the middle of crisis. Whatever kind of crisis may be going on in your own life, or whatever kind of crisis may be going on in your area, it may be going on even in this world right now. Know that we as the people of God, as the people of faith, we can be courageous in the middle of crisis. We don't have to break down in the middle of crisis. We can break through even though we may be going through a crisis, because we can go to the one who has all the answers, and he will give us wisdom and he will give us guidance. And not only that, he will give us favor as he gave Esther favor. So she fasted and God gave her quick action. He gave her wisdom and gave her the know-how to go before the king. She chose courage over fear, and that created favor for her. I want to leave this lasting point with you. Oftentimes, God uses the most unlikely characters to fulfill his purposes. He elevated a Jewish orphan, a foster child, to be queen of a great empire. Like, she wasn't queen of no little small town, no little small country. She was queen of a great empire that had much power and influence. He took this orphan girl, raised her up to become queen of a great empire. And that position that he put her in allowed her to be somewhat of a deliverer for her people, allowed her to be the answer for a crisis for her people. So don't think it's strange that when God elevates you and raises you to a certain position, you never know how he will use you to be an influence for your people, to be an influence for your community, to be an influence. He's looking for people who are willing. Not always the most influential, not always the most talented. God can use you to accomplish his purpose and his will. So be encouraged. Choose faith over fear. Choose to be courageous over fear. Give God your willingness, and you watch how he elevates you and he gives you favor so that you can use your life to fulfill his purposes in the earth.